Let's face it, transitions are complex. There are so many ingredients which go into navigating a successful transition season. With all the uncertainty and upheaval, rest may seem like a luxury we can't afford. But can we afford not to rest? Welcome to Navigate. I'm your host, Tim Austin, and this is the podcast designed to take the guesswork out of transition. Whether you have a transition looming in your future or you're trying to make sense out of a past or a current transition, this show will help you think more creatively and plan more strategically around any transition season you find yourself in. At Navigate, it's about leveraging these challenges that come with change for optimal learning and growth. So today we continue the conversation on rest and Sabbath with my guest, Lori Ferrell. And as I mentioned in the first part of this two-part episode, you won't find a legalistic, stifling, narrow approach to Sabbath here. This is a conversation infused with grace, wisdom, and inspiration to walk in the freedom God has for each one of us. Lori Ferrell is a wife, mother of two boys, and a spiritual director. Her passion is to invite others into rhythms of rest and to know themselves as fully known and fully loved. So thanks again for joining me, and let's pick up where we left off with Lori Ferrell. Let's see, where do we go from here? There's so much more.
I wonder if,
Go ahead, Lori.
Just like you were saying, we could offer a few of these baby steps in and some of the their spiritual practices and even just what activities might help people see Sabbath beyond just, I don't know what people bring to Sabbath. Yeah. I know there could be baggage. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And there can also be people out there listening that are definitely on this journey and have explored different things. But I think if they're caught in that place of there's baggage or it doesn't breathe new life, they don't hear it with excitement, then maybe we can help them get some ideas.
That's great. Let's do that. And before we do that, Lori, can I go back to something you had said? And I'd like you to share this if you could, because there was a season you said in a season of burnout where you heard this invitation of rest for yourself. And it was hard, you said, because there were others around you who were also tired.
Yeah.
And what, sometimes we're looking at other people's perceptions, or we feel a pressure in a group setting or a community setting. Tell me about that, just to kind of unpack that a little bit.
Well, I still remember, where we were living, it was a smaller country. And so at the end, when we were about to leave and take our sabbatical, each time somebody left in that country, we're at this little international fellowship, and we all had opportunity to go up and share like what was next and where we're headed. And a lot of times people would say, well, we're going back because of this happening, or, there's a lot of reasons that take people home, but I hadn't really ever heard someone stand up there and say, we're going to take a sabbatical. Mm. And so when we got up and we were invited to share, and I just was like feeling embarrassed to be like, we're tired, we're going to leave for a sabbatical. In a way, it was like, oh, how can I receive this invitation when I look around and I see so many people that are weary? I'm not the only one in this room that feels weary. And that doesn't mean that sabbatical is the only answer for that. Mm-hmm. But it was very much hard for me to not feel guilty, like I'm bailing out or something. But it was like, God was just like, just trust. Receive this invitation. And with that, it's like God was opening something up to say, if this invitation isn't for you, then who is it for? As if I maybe can read it and think, well, that's for so-and-so, but not for me. And sometimes I do that. Like, oh, well, so-and-so can have that, but not me. And God was like, Lori, this time I'm inviting you. And I want you to receive this, because this invitation is for all of us. But if you can't receive it for you, then how can you say it's for everyone? That was definitely a big step of courage to say that in front of a group of weary people, though.
Yeah. Yeah, and some of our listeners may be feeling some of that pressure around them with, if they're in a team setting or a community setting, a church setting where a lot of activity is taking place and there's a lot of weary souls around them, and there sometimes work and ministry gets to be almost competitive, and I think in those times we do need to step back and say it's not about who can be the last one standing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because we can be standing, but we can be completely unhealthy,
Yeah.
and emotionally, mentally, physically spent. And that's not where we want to end up. We want to end up in a good place. And so these sustainable, going back to practices, and I think this is a good place to just to talk about some of those steps people can take. So why don't you start us off with that?
Yeah, so I think that the steps, well, there's just so many. Um, I guess one thing I want to reflect before I move on
Hmm.
is just that not everyone's story is the same, because I'm very cautious when I share that I don't want to say, well, if you're one of those people listening and you feel near burnout, or maybe you're not using the word burnout, but you definitely feel weary. Um, and I think taking a year off for sabbatical or even 6 months, it's not everyone's next step. Um, and so I think we all have to take that with God and wrestle out, like, what is it that I'm being invited towards? And so
Hmm.
God's creative. And
Hmm.
when he invites us into rest, I just trust that for each of us, God knows who you are, who I am, who the listeners are, and what you need to be rested. So none of this is meant to be like if you're this, then this is what you need. So I just want to hope that the listeners can hear that.
Hmm. Good, good, good.
Yeah. But yeah, what are those things that can maybe be those little first steps? Is that what you're ready to share?
Yeah, exactly. What are some things we're noticing? And I'll just maybe just say this for me personally, as I've transitioned and am on this journey of discovering what Sabbath and rest means for me, and how that I've been asking that question: what is life giving to
Mm,
me? So for me, I love nature, and so I have to get outdoors. And even if I go through a day, sitting in front of my computer screen and rarely look outside the window, even, just because I'm so engrossed in the work, I am not taking notice, and I'm so something about using all of my senses to experience, especially springtime, right? I mean, I can,
yeah.
so like if I have my coaching sessions and if I have back-to-back sessions, I try to have some buffer space in between those so that I can at least step outside and pause and notice. No, it's not a Sabbath day. I do that differently, but Sabbath moments, I guess you could call them, where I can just step outside, feel with my hands, touch something in the garden, put my feet on the ground and look up into the sky, just whatever I need to kind of recenter and refocus on God and the beauty of his creation ultimately. And so I find moments to pause that have really helped me as I've been asking myself the question, what is life giving? Short walks, even where when I need to just let go of things. I have an app that helps me to pause. It's just a 1 minute. John Eldridge has an app. It's a 1 minute pause. You can do a 3 minute, 1 minute, 5 minute, but it's a great little thing that just helps me to enter into a brief moment of rest. And so
Yeah.
sometimes those times are brief. And so that's kind of the journey I'm on now. I don't know what would be life-giving for you, unique to your season and your situation you're in.
Yeah. Well, I have a similar kind of app on my phone called the Centering Prayer app. So,
Hmm.
one of the practices I find that brings rest for me is just setting an alarm. It has different time settings that you can decide. And So I do try to do that daily. And it's not something that I do because I should. It's really, truly a practice that I found is restful and I look forward to. And it's just a way of being with God. So people that aren't familiar with centering prayer, it's they can look it up and see more what that is. But there is an app also that explains it. And like you, I definitely find that nature is restorative. So getting outside and going for a walk, not necessarily trying to break a sweat. I mean, I do because I'm in Florida, but yeah, just being where I can see trees, green, hear birds, something that is not like the cement or busy or in a car. So
Right. Yeah.
anything that engages me, bringing me to this present moment. And so that might even just be, like you said, a moment, pause, like you step out between two clients. And so for me, I notice taking deep breaths that are very intentional help me to
Yeah.
ground in this moment. So
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And even the exercise that we did, incorporating the deep breaths with some meditation on scripture, a short
Mhm.
verse or passage. Yeah. Great ways to step back and pause to recenter and focus when we tend to, and even those short moments are ways to help us not forget, going back to that remembering piece. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think what we're talking about here is Sabbath and rest with freedom, knowing that there's
Mhm.
creativity. God invites us into this, knowing how uniquely he's designed us and what season we're in and what is going to be life-giving for us in this time and place. And so there's a freedom here to explore and to practice things, which I would love to encourage our listeners to try out an app that we mention here on the podcast, or one of these exercises. If it doesn't work for you, that's fine, but try something out, give it a little time, and see if it works, see if it becomes life-giving and a sustainable practice for you, along this journey. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely trial and error. And I've also heard that just even seeing your life as seasons. And so something might be restful for a season, and then you might find it's not really restful anymore. And it's okay to, when we notice that, to decide, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to try to find something else. So
Yeah.
to not
Yeah.
even get tied up with, well, that was restful last week and I don't understand why it's not helping me. So
Right.
just even approaching it with a more playful or free
Mm.
attitude that can just say, oh, okay, let's
Yeah.
try something else.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. I think I'm kind of thinking of distinguishing between what's life-giving and what are activities that we do to kind of step back or to disengage, that are more like coping mechanisms, or things that kind of numb us to reality. And of course, binge watching is one of them. There's a lot of other things that could be uh, forms of numbing out and escaping, overeating, and lots of different ways we could do that. And we're not saying that like a little binge watching isn't something that we
Right.
can't do, but we're looking at more specifically what are some things that really feed the soul and impart true rest, into our lives, is sustaining and life giving. So, any other thoughts on that, Lori, as far as practices?
Yeah, I mean, just going on with you're saying, the numbing or the
Mm-hmm.
life draining versus what's life giving, what's truly restful. And really, it just comes down to noticing, the fruit of that time. And so if you come out of something and just are like, wow, I just really disconnected from life, and
Mm-hmm.
um, maybe even feel more grumpy or tired, or after watching a lot of movies or even reading a good book, and yet just finding yourself grumpy. I think we can notice our reactions and our dispositions afterwards to notice, it's not bad to do those things, but just maybe noticing, if I need rest, then maybe I need to get out and do something that actually is going to rejuvenate or bring life and this time I chose something that was more in the numbing or like checking out kind of category. And we need both, and we will continue to do both. But yeah, today we're definitely talking about what is restful, what is producing that fruit of like, I feel restored. I feel more like myself and how God's made me to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Another practice for me, I think that I'm learning to lean into is the practice of gratitude in my own life, and just noticing. Again, I think it's like you said, taking notice of the things, so many things that I can be grateful for, even in a messy or hard or challenging life season.
Yeah.
And taking notice, and then in my solitude, in my times of quiet, being able to just, or breath prayers, even just thank you, Lord. Yeah, I'm so grateful and so privileged in so many ways. And so there's, gratitude is another one that for me. So these aren't, it's not rocket science. It's just really like, again, taking notice and then stepping into trying something out. I love what you said. We get, just kind of a playful creativity and approach to this whole area of rest and Sabbath. So.
Yeah, I think that for some of us, Sabbath, we might think, oh, I need to go to church, and then I need to like journal and I don't know, do nothing or something. But actually, a friend of mine, she's a philosopher, but she loves the topic of play. And she did a class last summer that I took, and it was so fun because she was just talking about play and the art of play and the philosophy of play. And it really got me thinking, play is where we're not trying to be productive. Children are not engaging in play in order to be productive. Children are not playing in order to define who they are. And so play is a way of resting, and it's experiencing God's joy and delight, which is a big part of rest and knowing our identity.
Yeah. And there's so many ways, are your hobbies, the things that you do, are they rest? Do you feel invited into rest when you're doing those? Like I feel very much like when I'm out in my garden. Now, if I go out there and if I let it go and there's just too many weeds, and it's just, that will drive me crazy. So I do have to kind of keep on top of things. But when I can just step into the garden for a little bit, get my hands dirty, pull a few weeds and see how things are going out there and cultivate the ground a little bit, then that's life-giving for me. And that's a time when I feel like I do enter into some Sabbath rest. So like you said, it's not necessarily doing nothing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think some of the other things that might be like where the creative process of what is restful. Just, I think what you said, being outdoors, and some people like to mountain bike. I know my husband finds that to be a restful thing, to go mountain biking or to go surfing. So those kinds of activities can be very restful for some people, and for some that may not be what they want. I also think celebration and feasting are words that could be, invite us into this idea of Sabbath. What did the Israelites do? They ate.
Yeah.
The part that was missing is they weren't cooking. I mean, really, that's a hard thing for us because, I'm not saying we have to be legalistic about it, but probably back then we're cooking. There's no fast food. There's no quick fixes for that. God's really inviting them to really get to have the benefit of, let's eat this together. Let's be together around a table or whatever that looks like, and the enjoyment, but not the work and the labor intensive part. But in our culture, we don't have to be like all legalistic about this, but it's the invitation to feast together. And I know during COVID, that's a thing I think we're all looking forward to doing more of in the near future, is being around tables with people again. I know I've missed that.
Yeah. And that's part of celebration. And that's a good reminder. Yeah. So there's so many things, like you saying, just so many ways that we can practice rest and Sabbath. So maybe our listeners who have joined in and just are listening to this episode, we've shared some things. We've shared practice about some potential practices, things that are life-giving. Where would you suggest they take it from here? Maybe, and I know people are in different seasons and stages and in terms of where they're at in this whole area of rest, but where could someone start who's just kind of saying, I'm totally out of practice, or I've never really put together, some intentional practices for my life, some daily or weekly rhythms and routines. Where do we start?
Yeah, I think the biggest part of starting is giving ourselves permission. So I would just to make note of it, it does take that courage to believe that we really are able to rest and to take a break from our work. And even if that's for 30 minutes, so giving ourselves permission to do that. And then I would just say, do it in baby steps.
Mm-hmm.
If you aren't one who has had like rhythms of rest in your life, like whether that's Sunday or Monday, I mean, it doesn't need to be on Sunday, but that idea of a Sabbath day, if that feels impossible right now, why not just allow yourself to have a portion of a day?
Yeah.
And so it might look like, okay, this week I'm going to try to set aside 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And even that, if that feels like too much, then let's dial it back to, is there something you could do for 30 minutes?
Mm-hmm.
And for some people that might sound, well, what's 30 minutes? But 30 minutes, if that's more than what you're doing, that is something.
Yeah.
So first, just giving yourself permission to take that pause in your week. And I love that. I think you mentioned it earlier, but rhythms of rest. And so building rhythms of rest, whether that's little rhythms in our day. You've got that little app you said from Eldridge. So if that helps someone to have a rhythm, like at 2:00, I'm going to take a 2-minute pause. Or on Monday morning, I'm going to take a 30-minute, whatever. I know for me as a mom, this before COVID, when you could actually have these times to do these kind of things. And when I was still living overseas, I could go for a 1-hour massage and it would only cost $7. And so on Monday, when my kids went off to school, that became like my Sabbath rhythm, because when my kids were home, that's not a Sabbath time. So I just found myself on Monday mornings, okay, I'm not going to try to be productive today. I'm not going to try to figure out what do I need to do. I mean, I do need to go get groceries, but I'm going to start with giving myself permission to do this self-care thing.
That's a great encouragement. Just start with giving yourself permission. And as we take these small steps, we might just find that we want more and we need more, and we grow into it just like any practice. And we can come guilt-free. We can come to God and approach rest guilt-free, because it's his invitation to us. And it's not a reward for work done and accomplished and all the boxes checked. It's to come right in the middle of all of that, And I like what Charles Spurgeon says. He says, rest time is not waste time. It is economy to gather fresh strength. It is wisdom to take leave. In the long run, we shall do more by sometimes doing less. And that was Charles Spurgeon, a great preacher and very prolific writer, and in terms of his sermons and everything. But that's just a great encouragement, I think, for all of us to, as we wrap up here, Lori. Any last words for any final words for our listeners today as we wrap up the episode here? I think this is just going to be so valuable for those who come to this episode in terms of getting some tips and resources and encouragement around the theme of rest.
Yeah, I feel like we've said so much. It's like, what more? There is so much more, but I just would say, I really pray that any of the listeners out there, wherever you find yourself, you can just allow yourself to notice what's risen up in this podcast, and just trust that God is for you. And even if that journey might look different or slower or faster or in a different place altogether, but I do think that God wants to invite us all into this experience of knowing ourselves as the beloved. So
Good. Yeah, such a great note to wrap this up on. And just let our listeners know, Lori, how they can connect with you. You're a spiritual director, having a companion on the journey of engaging in rest, learning to rest, putting rest into practice, such a valuable resource. So tell us how our listeners might be able to connect with you.
Yeah, so I have a website, which I think we can put in the show notes, but www.soulsalah.org. And that's one way of getting in touch with me. And actually, there's several other spiritual directors that are listed on that website that all have served overseas or are currently serving overseas. But yeah, there's lots of other ways to find a spiritual companion or spiritual director if people are interested. And they are a person that could come alongside and help you find what is restful for you.
Yes. Well, thank you again, Lori, for being with me today. And we'll have to do this again in the near future. There's so much here, but I trust that what we've talked about today will really just go out and help some of our listeners today. And just a reminder, I love this quote by Nancy Spielberg, of God's unlimited resources and potential to fill our cups. But the language used in this quote just is encouraging to me. She says, "Lord, I crawled across the barrenness to you with my empty cup. If only I had known you better, I'd have come running with a bucket." I love that. We can come with our limited resources and containers, but that doesn't limit God and how he can fill us and supply our needs and encourage us and renew us and restore us. So we'll leave that with our listeners today. And thanks again, Lori, for joining me.
Thank you.
Out of all that's been said in this conversation with Lori Ferrell, I hope that you are sensing a personal invitation from God to enter into rest. How can you build some simple and consistent rhythms and routines into your days and weeks which are truly restful, which are truly life-giving? If you're really not sure how to answer that question, start by making a list of activities that you find life-giving and those activities that you find draining. Then start to calendarize intentionally those life-giving activities into your days and weeks as components of rest. Speaking of rest, I'd like to invite you to join us for one of our Encompass weekend retreats that my wife and I facilitate. We recently held one in beautiful Lake Tahoe, and it was an amazing time of renewal and retooling for the next season. While we're in the process of finalizing the next dates for the retreats, we've put together a wait list you can join by heading over to our retreat page at encompasslifecoaching.com. Thanks for joining me today for this episode of Navigate Podcast. I've been your host, Tim Austin, and you can also find me hanging out at encompasslifecoaching.com as a coach, blogger, and retreat facilitator. I hope this has been helpful to you, and if it has, would you mind rating the podcast, writing a review, and sharing on social media? And of course, you can always subscribe so that you're sure to get in on the next episode. I'll catch you next time.